The moment the sealed files cracked open, the shockwave was immediate, brutal, and impossible to contain, because suddenly, buried inside a government-released registry tied to the shadowy empire of Jeffrey Epstein, two royal names exploded into public view at the exact same time: Meghan Markle, Prince Andrew, one name appearing in the newly exposed network records, the other ending the morning in custody. And the question that instantly ignited across the world was terrifyingly simple: how deep does this royal connection actually go? What began as a quiet document release from Washington quickly detonated into a political and royal earthquake. According to officials connected to the Department of Justice, the list was not a rumor, not a leak, and not a conspiracy theory whispered through tabloids. It was an official disclosure compiled after years of digital forensics, thousands of encrypted emails, flight manifests, bank ledgers, guest lists, and private calendar entries tied to Epstein's sprawling global web. More than 300 influential names surfaced in the archive: bankers, billionaires, politicians, power brokers. And then one name that no one expected to see written alongside that network: Meghan Markle. The revelation traveled across the Atlantic like a lightning strike, slamming straight into Buckingham Palace, Montecito, and the fragile reputation of a monarchy already wobbling under years of scandal. According to investigators studying the documents, Markle's name appears multiple times in communications tied to Epstein's social circuit during the mid-2010s, the period when she was transitioning from television actress on the legal drama Suits into a rising public figure navigating elite, philanthropic, and media circles. The entries themselves do not accuse her of wrongdoing, but what they do reveal is far more complicated: a web of invitations, discussions, and guest list considerations tied to Epstein, connected gatherings in New York and Palm Beach. All these were not ordinary parties. They were influence markets disguised as social events, private stages where power circulated quietly among financiers, celebrities, and political elites. According to analysts combing through the files, Epstein's operations specialized in identifying emerging figures before they reached global fame, strategically pulling them into networking environments that blurred the lines between charity, media collaboration, and elite access. Markle's name reportedly appears in conversations discussing potential attendees for exclusive gatherings between 2014 and 2016, the exact window when her global visibility was rising rapidly. One recovered email chain references a curated guest list for a Manhattan event intended to connect media figures with philanthropic investors. Another entry mentions her in relation to a proposed international outreach project connected to donors operating inside the same circles Epstein frequently cultivated. The implication is not criminal, but the proximity is uncomfortable, because once the Epstein name appears beside anyone's, it leaves a stain that public opinion rarely erases. In Montecito, sources said the reaction inside the Sussex camp was immediate and frantic. Advisors scrambled into emergency strategy meetings, trying to understand how Markle's name had surfaced in a federal archive tied to the most notorious trafficking scandal in modern history. Crisis communication specialists were reportedly mobilized within hours, attempting to frame the references as routine networking typical for an actress navigating elite charity and entertainment environments. But the problem is the evidence itself. Investigators did not rely on vague testimony or gossip. They reconstructed a digital trail, cross-referencing event calendars, financial records, and correspondence logs extracted directly from Epstein's servers. And once a narrative begins forming around documented data, controlling the story becomes almost impossible. The Duchess, who once fought fiercely to escape the relentless scrutiny of the British royal press, now faces a new and far more dangerous opponent: a government archive filled with time-stamped records. For critics of Meghan, the revelation instantly became explosive ammunition. For supporters, it feels like a brutal twist of fate, another chapter in a saga where the Sussexes seem unable to escape controversy no matter how far they move from royal life. But while Markle's name ignited headlines, an even more dramatic development was unfolding thousands of miles away. Because at the exact same time the documents surfaced in Washington, authorities in Britain were executing an arrest that many believed would never happen. In the cold morning light outside Windsor, Scotland Yard officers moved with calculated precision. Prince Andrew, once the favored son of Queen Elizabeth II, was taken into custody following an extradition request connected to newly uncovered evidence within the Epstein investigation. The image alone shattered centuries of royal mythology. A senior royal detained, not shielded by titles, not protected by palace walls, but processed under the same legal procedures that govern every citizen. According According to prosecutors, the arrest was triggered by fresh forensic analysis of Epstein's communications and recordings. Investigators reportedly uncovered encrypted message threads and audio transcripts suggesting coordinated meetings and financial discussions linked to Epstein's operations. Some of those recordings, analyzed with advanced voice recognition systems, were said to identify Andrew's voice discussing asset arrangements and scheduling details connected to Epstein's private properties, including locations in London, New York, and the Virgin Islands. The charges extend beyond the allegations that have haunted Andrew for years. Prosecutors are now examining whether his position as a former United Kingdom trade envoy was used to facilitate introductions inside Epstein's powerful financial network, raising the possibility of misconduct in public office and obstruction of investigative processes. It is an escalation unlike anything the monarchy has faced in modern history. Royal historians are already comparing the moment to the 1936 abdication crisis when King Edward VIII relinquished the throne for love. But this scandal carries a darker shadow. That crisis was about duty and romance. This one is about alleged criminal networks, influence trading, and the collapse of the idea that royal blood somehow exists above the law. For the victims of Jeffrey Epstein, Andrew's arrest represents long-delayed accountability. For the House of Windsor, it represents a nightmare scenario unfolding in real time. Because once a royal is processed through the justice system, the aura of untouchable privilege begins to crumble. And the monarchy, an institution built as much on perception as power, cannot survive long if that illusion disappears. Across the globe, cameras captured the moment Andrew was escorted by officers, his expression frozen somewhere between disbelief and resignation. A single image, yet one that may define the final chapter of his public life. And behind palace doors, a far more terrifying realization was beginning to sink in. Because if the documents already released are only the beginning, then the real storm may still be coming. The silence that followed the arrest did not calm the storm. It made it worse. Because once the image of a prince in custody circled the world, every institution connected to the monarchy suddenly understood the same terrifying truth. This scandal was no longer a rumor swirling in tabloids. It had crossed the line into official investigations, legal warrants, and international cooperation. And when scandals reach that level, they rarely shrink. They expand. They dig deeper. They pull more names into the light. Inside Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere reportedly turned tense, almost surgical, as advisors and legal teams began mapping the damage hour by hour. Because the question looming over the palace was no longer simply about Prince Andrew. It was about survival. Could the monarchy itself withstand the aftershocks of what was coming next? According to insiders familiar with the internal discussions, King Charles III made a decision that stunned even some of his closest advisors. Instead of retreating behind the ancient royal strategy of silence, he chose the opposite path: full cooperation. No delays, no royal shield, no procedural walls designed to slow investigators down. In a carefully worded statement released by Buckingham Palace, the king acknowledged the gravity of the situation and pledged absolute support for the legal process surrounding Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. It sounded calm on paper, but those inside the palace understood the brutal reality behind that statement. This was not simply cooperation. It was a calculated sacrifice. Because by opening the palace archives to investigators, the crown was effectively allowing law enforcement to examine decades of royal communications, visitor logs, travel schedules, and correspondence linked to Andrew's past activities. Balmoral guest records, Sandringham visitor entries, archived emails from Andrew's former office during his tenure as the United Kingdom's trade envoy. Files that had remained sealed for years were suddenly being handed over to authorities examining Epstein's global network. It was an unprecedented move. In modern royal history, no monarch had voluntarily exposed the inner paperwork of the royal household to such an extent. But Charles reportedly understood something that the old royal guard had long resisted. Secrecy no longer protects institutions in the digital age. It destroys them. Every withheld document eventually leaks. Every hidden record eventually surfaces. And when it does, the damage is multiplied by the perception that someone tried to bury the truth. So instead of waiting for that drip of revelations to slowly poison the monarchy, Charles chose to cut the wound open immediately. A brutal gamble. One designed to convince the public that the crown stands under the law, not above it. Meanwhile, in Washington, Attorney General Pam Bondi publicly praised the cooperation between British authorities and American investigators. According to officials connected to the task force, intelligence shared by the palace has already helped investigators reconstruct Epstein's movements during several previously unclear visits to London. Financial transfers, meeting arrangements, Private introductions that were once buried inside encrypted files are now being pieced together with the help of British intelligence and financial regulators. And as investigators dig deeper, another powerful figure inside the royal structure has quietly stepped forward to manage the crisis: Prince William. While Charles handles the official response as king, insiders say William has taken command of the strategic containment effort behind the scenes. Inside Kensington Palace, a small group of advisors, legal analysts, and former intelligence specialists have reportedly formed what some staff members privately call a war council. Their task is simple but brutal: analyze every single connection between the royal household and anyone linked to Epstein's social network. The process has been described as exhaustive. Palace records are being cross-checked against the newly released American files line by line. Guest lists are being compared. Travel overlaps examined. Any possible undisclosed meeting or interaction is being identified before investigators discover it independently. Sources say William's leadership style during the crisis has been cold, methodical, and entirely focused on protecting the future of the monarchy. There is no room for sentiment, not even when the subject is his own uncle. Because William understands something perhaps more clearly than anyone else in the palace, the way this scandal is handled will define his future reign long before he ever wears the crown. According to insiders involved in the discussions, William has already pushed for structural reforms inside the royal institution: new visitor screening procedures, tighter oversight of royal charity partnerships, expanded compliance reporting for members of the royal family involved in international outreach and diplomacy. The goal is not simply damage control, it is institutional survival. The monarchy must prove it can evolve, or it risks becoming irrelevant in a world that increasingly demands transparency from its leaders. And yet, while the palace battles its largest institutional crisis in decades, another front of the scandal continues to simmer thousands of miles away in California. Montecito, the home of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, the couple who once stepped away from the royal machine in search of independence and control over their narrative. But now, ironically, their names have been pulled back into the gravitational pull of the very institution they tried to escape. According to investigators reviewing the Epstein archive, Harry's name also appears inside the broader collection of documents, though in a far less significant context than the entries referencing Markle. The references relate to public events between 2017 and 2018, international polo tournaments, environmental summits, and charity gatherings where individuals connected to Epstein's extended network were also present. Investigators emphasize that these overlaps appear incidental rather than coordinated, but the Epstein network operated with extraordinary reach, deliberately embedding itself in philanthropic, financial, and diplomatic spaces where powerful figures naturally cross paths. And that is precisely what makes the situation so volatile. Because once a name appears anywhere within the Epstein archive, nuance disappears in the court of public opinion. For Harry and Meghan, the timing could not be worse. Their public identity in the United States has been carefully built around activism, charity work, and social advocacy. The Markle Foundation, their flagship organization, promotes humanitarian initiatives and progressive causes. But now the foundation itself is undergoing internal audits to ensure no donors or partner organizations have any historical overlap with Epstein's financial ecosystem. Their legal team has reportedly begun voluntarily sharing documentation with investigators to prevent speculation from spiraling further. Still, the reputational damage may already be spreading. According to media insiders, corporate partners connected to the Sussex brand have begun quietly reviewing the situation. Streaming giant Netflix, which holds major production agreements with the couple, is said to be examining the emerging narrative closely. No official action has been taken, but in the world of corporate partnerships, perception alone can trigger caution. Even the question of royal titles has resurfaced in political discussions. Critics who have long argued that the Sussexes should be stripped of their titles now believe the scandal strengthens their argument. Supporters say the references in the files are minimal and unrelated to wrongdoing, but the debate itself has reignited, another complication layered on top of an already explosive royal crisis. Yet perhaps the most unsettling reality is that the Epstein files released so far may only represent the first wave. Investigators believe additional archives remain encrypted or partially analyzed. Every new document uncovered has the potential to expose further connections between global elites, financial institutions, and political networks that quietly intersected with Epstein's empire. Around the world, governments are now studying the transparency legislation that forced these disclosures in the United States. Lawmakers in Canada, Australia, and several European nations are considering similar similar measures designed to expose hidden influence networks among the global elite. In corporate boardrooms, executives previously associated with Epstein are stepping down under pressure from shareholders. Financial institutions are cutting ties with individuals mentioned in the documents.